All right, we're back. And now we'll be talking with Adam Harder, who is the CEO and co-founder of InPress, and he will tell us more about that in his talk, Making Media Literacy Sexy. How InPress is using journalism to forge deep human connection. Adam.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this. What I definitely tried to make sure was the most clickbaity headline of the entire conference. Thank you. I'm Adam Harder. As you said, I'm the co-founder and CEO of the first news-based dating and friends app, really, called InPress, and we launched 7 weeks ago in Washington, D.C. We currently have a couple of thousand users in DC. And really what the whole shtick is here is that we're using factual journalism as the data-driven conduit for human connection. And basically what we're trying to get to is we're using the content that all of you wonderful journalists are doing and drawing insights from it that are creating a new patented post-AI version of subconscious intertwining, as you'll see. So let's start here, right? Oh wait, what? Oh, where's my slides at? Oh my gosh, great. Apparently 4 cups of coffee didn't actually do the trick. Oh, well, that was our nice intro slide. There's your preview. There's our branding. So let's start way back when. The year was 2015, and I was actually in this exact room right here. Fun fact for all of you who didn't know this. I had the idea for InPress back then doing my master's in journalism innovation, the first 2U masters, for those of you who work at Newhouse and can remember that time. And the assignment of the capstone was to solve a problem in the media with technology, which I'll get to in a little bit. And that's how we got here. But I do want to actually focus a little bit about where I was mentally back in the year. Excuse me, it was 2015 at this point. 2016 is when I graduated. So I had been an Air Force news reporter for 4 years at that point. Look what a young whippersnapper I was. I was so happy, right? Doing all this cool stuff. And I had this weird, let's call it naive epiphany, that while I was reporting stories overseas for 4 years, right, I was kind of having my own little personal renaissance. I was 25 years old. I was meeting all these wonderful cultures. I was overseas that entire time. And this was kind of when the apex of Facebook and social media, Twitter, Snapchat were really, really, how do I say that? There was no escaping at that point, and we all kind of felt a naive optimism. Maybe I was the naive one, but what I was feeling at this time was, and it sounds so funny to say, I'm just going to be totally honest with you here. I remember thinking to myself, wow, here we are in this age where everyone can see all these different cultures instantly, interact with them. The amount of empathy that's going to come out of this, the amount of just natural liberal democratic values that will propagate from us being able to interact and see every other person in real time is going to be a gorgeous thing. I see people laughing. Wow. Well, the point is boy, how wrong I was, because then that was the very next year, which is right here. Yes. Oh, great. Okay. Well, it's nice to know I'm not the only one, because this year came around and I realized just how wrong I was. This year was very formative, obviously, for a ton of reasons, but it was the lead up to the 2016 election while I was stationed overseas as a broadcast journalist in Belgium that really started to show just how easy it was to manipulate folks who maybe didn't have the same media literate things to look out for that we all in this room probably are aware of. And that troubled me. I used the example that where I grew up in Ohio, you know, there are real people in my life right now who I know who are otherwise successful folks, right? They have their own businesses, they have beautiful families, but at that time genuinely believed that Hillary Clinton was a lizard person, right? Like that's an objective falsehood, but it was something that it didn't take a lot to believe, to manipulate them because of recommender systems. Their friends, the people that they trusted were sharing these things that, albeit fantastical, were kind of starting to control a narrative. And the point is that facts were losing, right? Facts were losing value and objective nonsense was winning in these algorithms. So back to the assignment at hand, solve a problem in the media with technology. So to me, the problem was and is social recommender systems. There's a reason that all of the journalists in this room right now who were journalists at the time of Facebook's upcoming, early 2010s era are skeptical of social medias now. That's because the way that the algorithms work, as we all know, are incentivizing quick clickbait, things that are very emotionally drawing over, say, objective facts, which often suck and they don't agree with us, right? That's what makes it so delicious to go on to something like a Facebook, because wow, all of a sudden the world's so much simpler and everybody thinks the things that we think, and it's just like a nice little comfy echo chamber. But unfortunately, that's not reality. The thing is that I've always thought is that we need to be beating them at their own game. And that's kind of where this whole idea came from. But I'm going to just give you an idea of, as we talk about all the different innovations of AI right now and in our seminar today, I went ahead on ChatGPT and I was like, hey, ChatGPT, can you go ahead and actually just make me a visualization of what the misinformation landscape was like in 2016? And this is what it came back with. So, do with that what you will. I actually think it's not terrible, aside from the random pickup truck. I don't really understand that, but I mean, I was like, oh, you know what? That looks just as chaotic as I feel like things were. Um, it's a good at encompassing the collective journalistic PTSD of the time. So the question I want to ask is, how could we incentivize media literacy? The fact of the matter is, if you tell someone that they should read more media literate or factual information, they know that it's true, but it's like telling someone to eat their veggies, right? That when left to their own devices, they're probably going to choose the chocolate. And that what like I was alluding to earlier, when showing factual information on a social media, 9 times out of 10, at least especially back then, it's going to either be demoted in the algorithm or just lose out to something much more exciting. And so facts are never going to win on the objection that, or on the basis that they're true, as wrong as that may be. But maybe if we used the factual journalism as the means to an end to a universal problem that everyone needed, then it would stand a chance. And that perhaps by giving people a different outcome that is more universal, they can slowly become more media literate as the means to the end, to the outcome that everyone really wants. And that's kind of where this whole idea came from. There we go. So, yeah, actually, I actually probably don't even need to allude too much on this. The idea was that, as we've seen now, that the quicker the dopamine hit, the faster the piece of information, the less depth it has the capacity to retain. And that is why the noisy space of social media has become so exhausting. That is why things have been taken at a very topical nature. But the fact of the matter is the world is not that simple. And it does take time and it does take research and depth. So what we've been finding is that our work is losing value because our work requires time and research and honesty and ethics. And there's just no place for that in a social media business model, which needs people to be addicted faster, right? It's not a natural fit. Now, funnily enough, you may not believe it, but you guys actually have a lot in common with dating app users, or at least the issues that are going on with journalism that I've described here share a lot of the same ills as that of dating app users. And I'm going to show you how. Way too long of a slide. You don't have to dig into it if you don't want to that much, but here are some of the high level commonalities, right? Superficial engagement rewards quick actions instead of in-depth analysis, as we've discussed. Recommender systems created the doom scroll. You know that's even, it's worse than doom scrolling on Facebook or TikTok is doom scrolling on humans as if they're discardable items on a store shelf, which is why that model hasn't exactly aged well either. Algorithms that showed people more of what they think they wanted to see, which was obviously creating echo chambers, and information and preference silos, which are only making societal divides wider and deeper. So yeah, Cupid, we have a problem. And this is the thing, when we talk about journalism and dating apps, this is such a, it's so funny because obviously that's not something you would think that would naturally correlate with each other. But as I'm saying, the exact same issues that go between them kind of are the same. It's the quick hits, it's the social algorithms, it's the transactional dopamine triggers that actually take away the humanity of both experiences. It's what's making them age poorly. And the fact of the matter is that in journalism, trends are changing. Journalism, if we're being honest with ourselves, has struggled to adaptively engage with the evolving delivery methods of information online. This is the same reason that the Washington Post has a younger audience engagement team, right? They're trying to solve, they have multiple employees that are their full-time job is just figure this out. This is an ongoing thing. How can we adapt our journalism without losing the ethics and the quality at scale while all these other social medias are creating all these fast ways to deliver information? So all this to say, now that we've painted the doom and gloom picture, innovative solutions are needed. So I use this example that I described earlier to one of the other speakers. I was sitting where you're sitting maybe 3-4 months ago. I was at Columbia Journalism School, and it was a seminar about how can we keep journalism relevant in the age of AI. We've all heard these discussions before, right? Like, how do we actually keep the facts at the top level? How do we keep our work from being diluted? We've actually heard a lot of these same themes today. And this panel was sitting on the board full of very famous journalists who, I'll be honest with you, would have intimidated me to meet, with a very full place just like this. And someone asked that exact same question from the audience of one of these journalists. They said, how can we ensure that our work is going to scale and stay relevant to people and that we aren't going to just lose out in the noise? How can we make sure that the facts are actually what's driving the engagement and people stay true to what they know is right? A very righteous question. But one of the journalists took the mic and they said their answer was, what we need is more citations. Maybe if we add more citations to our work, people will trust more where that we did the research, that's where it's coming from, right? And I just remember thinking to myself, that's the dumbest answer I've ever heard, right? Because your job as a journalist is to cite things. Like, we know that that's the bare minimum. And if you're trying to reach new audiences to compete in the intention battles, more citations, these half the people you're trying to reach don't even look for citations, or maybe even know what a citation is, where to look for it, right? Making the journalism less accessible is not what you need to be doing. We need to be finding ways to take our great work and opening our arms, not building moats, right? The good news about where we are right now in this sort of technical revolution that we found ourselves in is that we actually have so many options to go forward. But if all we're doing is trying to say that we're only going to use the things we know, which is writing and citations and sort of prescriptive methods to make our case stronger, the rest of the world's adapting a lot faster than that. So we need to basically find ways to keep up. Insert InPress. So basically what I had discovered here was the realization that factual news is actually a fantastic data conduit for who someone is as their subconscious selves. And I'll explain a little bit about that here. So InPress starts out looking a bit like a news aggregator, sort of like a Google News or an Apple News, except when you open up the InPress newsfeed, it actually functions like an old school newspaper, meaning that everyone in the localized area sees the same articles on a given day. We partner with Adfontes Media to make sure that every outlet on InPress maintains a strict neutrality and reliability range. So we like to, we honestly say water is wet type outlets, right? Or sometimes when people say, is there even such thing as an outlet that's accountable? I'm like, yeah, if you're a journalist and you're writing factual inaccuracies and you lose your job, that's called accountability. Like, these things exist, right? So examples being BBC, Reuters, AP, you're not going to find like the Young Turks or Fox News on here. And sure, that's great for us on the ethics side, but it's actually better for the user and their matching outcomes. So imagine the fact that if I show the example I was using yesterday with Gary is that if I show you all an article that says water is wet, right? Fine, that's an objective fact. But then I show you all an article, I show that half of the room, water is wet, but there's not enough of it because of Democrats. And I show that half of the room, there's water is wet, but there's too much of it because of Republicans. And I ask you, how does this article make you feel? Write that in emojis. The sentiment analysis is going to be all over the place. It makes no sense, right? And the fact of the matter is that water is wet, but now we have skewed data all over the place. So if I actually start you all at water is wet, you can do with that information what you will, but it's very easy that it's a lot more efficient to actually get to the core of what your interests are and then find the periphery. I also want to know how you feel about skiing in Vermont, right? How do you feel about Turkish food? That's how you kind of get more efficiently to the periphery of who someone is. And that's when the connection becomes very intriguing. So how this works is we actually take these articles into InPress and we scrape the keywords and topics from them. And another example I was using earlier is that let's just say an article has 3,000 words in it, right? Maybe 200-300 of those are keywords and topics. Well, we ask you, as you can see in the example up here, how does the article make you feel? You can select multiple emojis. How interesting is it to you? How important is it to you? Well, if there were 200 keywords and topics in that article, you just gave us 5x sentiment analysis. That's 1,000 insights per article. It doesn't take us long to get to those core interests. And like I said, those more peripheral interests. One moment as my computer locked out. There we go. So this is a massive amount of evolving data. We kind of describe it as a Nielsen report that never stops, right? Because what we're actually capturing, because we are a dating and connections app, you have to tell us certain parts of your demographic. We can't match you with people if we don't know where you're located. We have people who like to put their religion. People might obviously have to put their sexuality, their gender, all these kinds of things. So the more that people rate and read, the better their matches become. So that's why it's an incentivized model. That's where the data gets really interesting because it's a massive trove of it, right? So if there are 1,000 insights per article, we have a gamified system we're building right now where people will get rewards for reading and rating 10, 25, 50, up to 1,000 different articles. I'll show you actually what some of these engagement metrics are like in a bit, but it's working. And at scale, this becomes bigger than journalism. It's interesting to every B2B business. Say you want to know how, I don't know, a 37-year-old Asian American woman in Western Wyoming feels about sustainability, right? How much do they care about trade deficits? It could be anything. And it works like a nuclear engine because people keep doing it because it's good for them. What we were talking about earlier in your presentation about giving people a reason to engage with journalism, giving them something that they could take tangibly with them. But the pitch always has been with journalism is we offer a great service. We offer you factual coverage and fantastic analysis. Full stop. Now it's, we know you're going to be reading journalism anyways. Why don't you fall in love about it? That's kind of how this works. These are actually real user profiles. So you'll notice that there is a match percentage up there, right? The beauty about us coming to the market now is that we don't actually have to explain how AI works. Obviously, data has high variability in the beginning. It kind of evens out in the middle. And that's how this is obviously working. But you'll see what your match percentage is with somebody. And you'll see what your top shared interests are with them. The top shared interests are the real differentiator of InPress. This is where it gets really juicy and interesting because those sets of top shared interests you see will never be the same for any other user that you see. They change every day in real time based on how you and that person think and feel about everything that you read and rate. So you'll see that some of the more interesting ones, like you'll actually notice some of them are pretty high level, right? As they would be. If you start at, say, sports, then it could go to baseball, then Yankees, then Derek Jeter, and it just gets more and more nuanced. And that's where it gets really interesting because you use these top shared interests as talking fodder to break the ice with, right? But no other dating app has that. And that's actually what we patented. It's the ability to take existing news media and use it as the data informing conduit to facilitate human connection. Some of the funny ones are Beetlejuice, right? New Beetlejuice movie came out. I'll be honest with you. I love Beetlejuice. It was really cool to me to see that. Fall foliage, sure, that's cool. Everyone loves that. But like does anyone know who Renee DiResta is? No, she's exactly. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Who's Renee DiResta? Go on.
So okay, the most recent aspect of it is she's the one who left Stanford Internet Observatory. She was a program manager there. She's published a lot on anti-misinformation. Her recent book is about how people can change falsity into reality by just doing it on social media and making it look like it's real.
Exactly.
That's her book. And I think she's moved now to a different university that's invited her to set up.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly right. And guess who I had that one in common with? My CTO and co-founder. So wouldn't that make sense, right? So and it just is really interesting to draw those because even now we're actually building out features. We're like maybe we probably read some of Renee DiResta's work, but maybe we don't know who that is off the top of our head. We'll click on the mutual interest. It'll give you a little AI like, oh, this is Renee DiResta. This is what you teach. So, oh, okay, cool. No, that would make sense that we would have that in common then. So we're basically making the entire matchmaking experience a little bit more human. Instead of basically, like I said, treating profiles based on only user-generated information, which let's be clear, people project. That's what social media is, right? You want to show people how you think they want to see you, how you want them to see you, not necessarily who you are. We like to say that we're matching people on the you that sits on the couch in your jammies scrolling on Netflix on Sundays. That's kind of the beauty of, because let's be honest, that's who your partner's going to end up living with anyways, right? Kind of, so. But we also use this example kind of on this real quick is that a very high level way of describing this is compatibility as a service, right? So how your puzzle piece of a human fits with every other puzzle piece of a human in real time at scale. Because each of you has many things in common with those who are sitting around you right now. You don't know what those are. It would take you hours of discussion to get to that crux. We basically take that and show it to you instantly. And in fact, a fun thing that we are doing, actually, we pushed this update 2 weeks ago for our launch party. But an entrepreneur who I was speaking with 2 months ago in New York City pointed out that they're like, actually, what you're building with these top shared interests, it works in a whole myriad of different ways you don't even fully understand yet. He's like, so he gave me this idea of like, why don't you actually put it so that people, when we meet today, by the way, if you've downloaded InPress, which is available right now in Syracuse specifically for this, and you'll have a QR code on your account. If I scan your QR code, we'll instantly see right now, standing face to face, what our weird subconscious interests are. And we can use that to elevate any conversation in person, right? Like instead of like his idea was, hey, why don't you sell this to like events, right? We're at an entrepreneurship event. Everyone's asking, what are you building? What are you doing? Right? It's kind of just like, let's just like ease our way into this somewhat. Are we selling each other? It's weird. It's like an icky kind of thing. Why don't we just like, oh my God, you like the Shins too, right? That was the example. You also read Renee Dever. That's crazy. What's your favorite like work of hers, right? It makes the whole thing a little bit more human. So, but yes, this is my GIFs aren't working like everyone else's. That's my fault, by the way. I should have sent the GIF files. So, you know, do it, but bear with me. Brian's talking here. But just want to kind of point out again that the media literate journalism is the means to an end, right? Maybe someone doesn't know what Reuters or AP is. They aren't used to reading it. It's not in their diaspora of friends. It doesn't get shared around their social channels, but they've heard about how their friends or cousins or whomever in the cities where we're launching this at first found the love of their life or found a really cool new group of friends with this weird thing called InPress. And so they're like, whatever, you know, I'll play ball. I'll read some Reuters if I get to this outcome. And the whole idea being that the Trojan horse example, to be fair, was not mine. That was someone at O&A. They were like, you're basically Trojan horsing media literacy. I'm like, yeah, kind of. That's kind of the overall goal here is just to, it's not only great for the data, but it's just kind of works well. So here's some of the key features insofar as they relate to journalism as well. So this is a new, timely, connective, and I'd like to think wholesome reason for people to engage with our news. It's the idea, like I said, of kind of, you already read the news, why not fall in love about it? We're actually seeing this as, I was telling him earlier that we actually have this really interesting insight. I don't know about you guys, but when like, it's like writing a story, you publish it, you find out what people think about it. That's when the real insights come. It's the same way with launching a product. And a customer said to me about 3 weeks ago, she's like, I just wanted to tell you that I opened up my Times app this morning and I was going to read a story there. And I thought, wait, I'm not getting anything for this. And then she went to InPress and found a version of it there instead. It's the idea that we're giving people a new reason to like, it's yeah, that's kind of, you kind of get my point, right? I didn't expect that. I'd expect for the behavior to be changing kind of that quickly, but why would she read it there when she can find her best friend here? You know, we're doing the exact same amount of work. You look at it as work. The third one is interesting too, because this tech was built with journalistic ethics at its core, right? Remember, I created this product as a means to incentivize media literacy. This isn't a piece of existing social media that was based on the money-making quick engagements and that we had to shoehorn journalism into. The journalism from a journalist trying to find a way to improve the journalist industry is how this was built. So I'd like to think that that's at least something to feel okay about a jumping off point. Now that I've even described to you the way that the model works, we can't actually deviate from those morals. It would skew the data. Even if we wanted to be like, oh, all of a sudden we don't care about doing the right thing anymore, it would ruin the whole product. Like the fact of doing the right thing is actually best for us, the model, the progress of the algorithm, and the user in this case. So an interesting way to kind of describe it, and I've been reckoning with how to describe InPress. Sometimes I want to say it's a social network. Sometimes I want to say it's a dating app. It depends on who's in the room, right? Dating app's never going to be the flavor of the season to a VC, but to say a news-based social app, what does that mean, right? InPress kind of falls right into the middle. It's a little bit of all three, but not exclusively any of them. And in fact, I even tried to find some corollaries between some of the other parts of this Venn diagram. And I think genuinely, I mean, I ran these through Claude, OpenAI, my friends, and we couldn't think of anything that was exclusively like a dating app, social media app, or news aggregator dating app. That's not really a thing. The closest we could come to is news aggregator social network, maybe Reddit. Even that feels like a stretch. That's kind of where InPress falls right into the middle. And the fun part about this is that it gets to leverage the good parts of each and do away with what we'd like to think is the ills of some of them. So that topical, not very deep content interaction. Yeah. And then another example of a GIF not playing, but you get the idea. I want to just clarify a couple things too, because I don't usually lead the pitch with this, but it's a very natural place for people's heads to go when I start describing it. Is that first off, we don't match people on political topics. I like to say that we are a dating and friends app that features news, not a news app that features dating. And that's an important distinction to make, because while we don't filter out any news on the news feed, we can't be having people match on certain things. The AI is going to scrape everything. That's why when we were talking earlier about having a very, with Dan's talk about having a very like human touch to actually do the work to make sure it's not propagating bad data that breeds bad data. We've genuinely had to filter out words like rape, like school shooting, can't have people matching on those words. What is that? You have to basically, it has to be mutually interest, good for society type things. We won't have somebody match on Build the Wall. We'll have them match on a band that they like. Like I said, a type of cuisine that they like, maybe a festival that's going on around them, things that are actually, what we're trying to do here is actually build bridges. And an example that I used earlier in a discussion out in the lobby is that, taking it back to the Ohio example, right? Let's just call it what it is. My friends probably see me living in New York. They think I'm a coastal elite, and that's fair enough. But when I go home on Thanksgivings and we sit around a bonfire, we drink crappy beer and we take the mick out of each other and have a nice time. We are who we are, who we grew up, because we still have that, a lot of those deep core interests, and there's a mutual respect there. And the fact of the matter is that even if we were sitting, no matter what political party you align on, no matter what culture you're from, we all share things deeper down. The question is, are we putting ourselves in a position with most social media to where all the conversations are happening at this topical level that we get so tired and pissed off at each other that we don't actually get to the deeper level to find out what those things are? So what we're doing here is we're trying to flip that on its head. Start at the deeper. By the time you figure out the more topical things, it's almost like you don't care that much. That you both enjoy fishing. you both enjoy going for running on marathons or something, right? The other thing that's worth calling out is what we mean by, like, we don't do political topics. I think it's just like, we won't do, you won't see Donald Trump or Joe Biden as a matching topic. You might see swing states, but that's almost just an objective high level thing. I'm in a room full of journalists, so I just need to make that one very clear. Okay. Oh yeah. That's what I was saying. We never filter out what the news is, but we just, we are, like I said, dating out the features news, not the other way around. And I think that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because it reminds me of something, which is, we do sort of have a vibe to maintain. I know a vibe seems like a maybe young, immature, amorphous word, but the fact of the matter is, we want people to feel comfortable. We want people to feel, I use the example that when we came up with a lot of entrepreneurs reasonably will say, get the product first out and then think of branding, right? And that's usually like Airbnb did that. Their product looked terrible at first, but it worked. But I've kind of feel like this is, being a connections app, it is a very vulnerable state for a user to be in. They're really like endowing a lot of trust in us. So it meant a lot to me that we have a brand that does that, which is basically, it can't be too much Bumble because you wouldn't want to read news on it. It can't be too much New York Times because you wouldn't want to date on it. It's got to be somewhere in the middle. So we actually, our creative director, to his credit, Jesse, he kind of actually landed us on fashion brands. Actually kind of based it on think like James Bond, right? Like, it's clever, it's sleek, it's smart, but it's informed, and it's kind of playful and intriguing as well. That's why our slogan is stay up to date. That's kind of shows what our brand is about. Granted, we are only 7 weeks old at this point, but I do think these metrics are kind of interesting. So we were bootstrapping this for a while. We don't have $1 bajillion to pay for marketing, but we've already gotten up to 1.2 thousand active users. But more importantly, 18,000 article ratings since the end of August. For that amount of people, that amount of ratings is a lot of engagement. And it goes back to that example I was using about the girl switching back to InPress instead of reading it on the Times. I mean, it's just, if you're curious, you can read any of the pieces of these outlets who have covered us. And that's actually that's a real quote of a user I actually interviewed last week, that they're often skeptical of the news part. They don't get it. But then when they start to really be like, oh, okay, this is actually not so bad. Interestingly, we joked about this in our seminar yesterday morning, is the idea that people were like, oh, if this was just its own news product, I would probably just use it for that. And it's like, this is basically just a newspaper. It's not that novel. It's just news that's finite and the same in a local area, and you can choose to not read what you want. But I think there might be this, and I have no data to back this up, this is just a theory, but I think there might be just this sort of like societal kickback against just being fed the same stuff all the time, being in the same bubble, that maybe people are like, oh, it's kind of nice to just be surprised sometimes, see some hyper local journalism, which is a good reason to call out real quick that local news is very important to us, because not just like as a talking point, it's literally a lot more outcomes driven. If I show someone a bunch of national news stories, that's interesting, I suppose. But if I have two people in a local area who are trying to meet, who we want to show are statistically into the same thing, it behooves us a lot more to show them that local music festival or that new restaurant that opened up down the road, because that's something they can actually tangibly go and do. So that's why usually I'd say about 25 to 40% of our news feed on any given day is local news. I'll be honest with you, I ripped this one straight from our VC pitch deck. So you can choose to, I'm not planning on spending much time on it, but it's the idea of showing that there actually is a lot of market cap here. This is not necessarily just journalism money. I'll talk a little bit about our revenue model Of course, a lot of it, we're still in the very beginning stages right now. So we still have to realize a lot of things. A lot of good dominoes have to fall in a lot of good directions. But this is money that's built on ethical journalism. I just think that's really important to call out, but I'll explain how we get here. We have 5 sources of revenue. The true number is more like 4.5 right now. We're kind of starting to figure out the 0.5, but I think it'll reveal itself in time. So the first one is our freemium model. This is lowest hanging fruit, right? This is very simple. If you were to use a Hinge or a Bumble or anything, they all have this. It's basically just a more expedited version of the matchmaking process. So for instance, you can see who might have swiped right on you, who was interested in you before you make a decision, or you can be put to, like, if you were in someone's leads feed, which is what we call leads, get it? Those are suggested user profiles. You could be put at the front of someone's. That's really all this is. And we've already built the features. That's fine. That's the quick revenue. And to be fair, it's not going to be that much for us in the grand scheme of things, but for all the competitors, that is their main source of revenue. The next one, this is where it starts to get interesting, is our ads on news feeds, right? You'll see an ad on impressive newsfeed. It'll look like another article, except of course it'll say paid sponsorship. But when we sell the ad space, we also get to ask the user, hey, how did this ad make you feel? How interesting is it to you? How important is it to you? This non-inferential sentiment analysis we can sell back to the advertiser. This is all anonymized data, right? We're not selling people's names and emails because, again, we have a vibe to maintain and we want to keep our user trust. But that's where that in and of itself is something that's not necessarily out there, because when the user rates these articles, they're still helping themselves, making their matchmaking data that much more robust. Helping the user, helping the advertiser, helping us. The third one, this is, I'll be honest with you, this one is actually not this is not by no means the biggest one, just one of my favorites. It's kind of cool. Like, how many of you are familiar with Washington, D.C.? Maybe raise your hands. Yeah, okay, cool. I'm going to just throw a name out there because it's what always comes to top of my mind. 930 Club, very popular music venue in Washington, D.C. Let's just say we have a partnership with the 930 Club. You have 2 people in a localized area who are trying to meet, or statistically proven to be among the top 5% of people interested in the 930 Club in the local area. We tell the 930 Club, hey, we have these 2 people that's the case for. Cut down your customer acquisition costs. Give them 20% off their tickets. They just got a first date idea, right? So it kind of just finishes out the customer journey. We give them things to break the ice with, and then we give them a hyper relevant way to apply it to actually meet each other in person. The next one, which is a long term, is obviously our anonymized data, which is what I've described here. And you'll see a quote a little later from the director of audience engagement or audience retention, excuse me, at Axios. But it also comes from a conversation that I had with the director of data research at the Washington Post, which is the idea that you can like something for a lot of reasons on Facebook when you share an article as an outlet. But what does that mean, right? Like, that's very surface level. The idea that we have this amorphous data cloud that I was describing, which the keyword being non-inferential. It doesn't take, like, TikTok and Instagram have fantastic data, but it takes a lot of repetition and a lot of hearts to get to what the crux of the heart is. Whereas people are incentivized to tell us the more specific forms of what they're thinking and feeling and caring about. That anonymized data, of course, extends beyond just applicability in journalism. And the last one, this is the amorphous one. This is the 0.5 that I was talking about. Is that sort of compatibility at a service, that as a service, that top shared interest that we were talking about, the insight that I got from that entrepreneurship seminar, that can be applied in a myriad of ways. And I'll be honest with you, we're not in a place right now to spend our time really thinking about all of them because you're a startup, but we're just trying to get day to day and improve the product little by little and expand. But these are some examples examples that have been given to me, right? Like, all these ways that you can actually start to use this hyper-specific subconscious data between people and eventually groups. So let's focus back onto the journalism aspect, where there's opportunity for collaboration. So what do outlets get from a partnership with InPress? And I want to be clear, these are actually conversations we're having now. Like, our legal team is drafting the templated agreements. We have meetings with, I won't say specific names, but major national outlets in the next 2 weeks who all reached out to us, which is kind of nice and cool. But the idea is that they're buying the stock while it's low. Let's call it what it is, right? They see some opportunity here. They're like, hey, someday they'll probably charge us a lot more impressible for this, but maybe we'll kind of help them get off the ground and get in there and see where this goes. What they get with us is access to our premium user revenues. Now, I'll show that. I'll just give you a little preview of the next slide, actually. We right now reserve 15% of our premium monthly subscription revenue for the outlets that are on InPress. The idea being here that we are only rewarding the good players in journalism, right? Putting money back into the outlets who historically have made the choice to do the right thing and report factual information, trying to make long-term, as we hopefully hit some of those larger TAM and SAM revenue numbers that you saw in the slides before, honestly, and this is a very lofty goal, and we'll see if we get here, but making truth more profitable than fear and rage bait in the content journalism space. Going back though, the obviously anonymized detailed sentiment analysis data that we've discussed. And I think the interesting one is kind of the audience reach, right? It's like I said, it's this new way for people to engage with our content. It's just this incentive hasn't existed before. And I'll use another example that a professor at Georgetown gave me. Sorry, I'm saying the word Georgetown at a Syracuse conference, but she's a marketing professor, and she was telling me that she's like, hey, Adam, I'm a 65-year-old widower, right, in Miami, and a lot of my friends are too. And they want to meet someone, but they don't want to go on the Tinders and the Bumbles of the world because, in her words, it's a bunch of young guys in Miami looking for a gold digger, right? And she's like, they would love this. I tell them about this because they know what they want, right? They're accomplished older women. They know what they want. They're not looking to waste time, not looking to be objectified. They are into this. You're missing an opportunity if you're not marketing to them. And that puts us in an interesting position because I think she's right, but everyone thinks dating app, they think, Gen Z. And to be fair, maybe Gen Z is also quite interested in this, but we have this potentially cross-generational product that can help a lot of people. Where do we begin? The content delivery changes, right? I've had people, our customers tell me, hey, Adam, I actually really like that it's written out journalism, but they're in their 30s. But I have our Gen Z users being like, oh my God, written out journalism. So when are we going to get short-term videos on InPress, which is another thing that we're actively looking into. But it's kind of like trying not to spread ourselves out too thin, but understanding that we're on to something that doesn't fall within the stereotypical engagement of a dating app. I'll get to the next one. This is the quote I was actually referring to earlier. If you're curious, it's like, don't take it from me. And then I'll get you to probably what's actually more interesting to you. When it comes to the anonymized data in the partnership, let's just be candid. We're a startup. We're expanding, right? When you launch a network-based product, you can't just launch it nationwide. We don't have the server space for that. We don't have the server runway for that. Our servers would melt if, God forbid, it took off, and we do not have the staff to fix it. That's why when you hear of a Facebook launching in a Harvard, an Uber launching in a San Francisco, Tinder, USC, these are finite networks that you get sticky in one place, prove the concept, iterate, correct, iterate, correct. It's less consequential if it's not working that well and it's just a campus then as opposed to nationwide, right? So that's kind of where we're at now. That's how you scale a network-based product. All that to say, the data isn't going to be that valuable at first. It's just not. We don't have that many users. We're in a localized area. How many people want to pay a lot of money for just the DC people, right? But as we expand to New York, as we expand to the Northeast corridor, which I'll show you here, in the nationwide, and let that data percolate a bit, get those engagements more and more up, that's where it really starts to get interesting and more representative. So when we partner with outlets, we're giving them this data for free for at least 2025, 2026, because to be honest with you, they're buying the stock while it's low for us, so to speak. And we appreciate that. I mean, it's good for us to have these outlet partnerships too. It's a good look, right? It shows that the journalism industry is also believing in us as well. And we do appreciate people taking what is essentially kind of an investment risk and spending time on a startup. So we're not going to start charging people for that is basically what I'm saying, at least not initially. So what do we want in return for an outlet partnership? 3 to 5 articles a day for the InPress newsfeed. Now, keep in mind, we have about 80 plus or minus articles on the InPress newsfeed at any given day. So we don't actually need like all of your content. We just need enough to kind of have a variable amount to choose from. If you're curious how we choose articles, I'm sure that question might come up. We have 4 different editors on staff who take weekly shifts to go in and actually, we have thousands and thousands of articles we can pick from every day because there's actually hundreds of outlets that fall within our neutrality range. We do 4 different editors because it's quite laborious, as a lot of you know, to be an editor and actually source through all that and pick the right articles and try to find a varying amount of them and a varying amount of outlets to pick from. But also because, if it's the same editor every week, that would just probably have an inherent bias. The more editors that we can do, the more different things that they would choose. It kind of keeps the app more fresh. Like I said, we'll only likely to use 1 to 2 of those articles per day per locale. We also want to obviously be able to continue to scan the keywords and topics from those because that's kind of the whole thing. Remove the paywalls. We can't have people reading articles that they can't read. Simple as that, right? But we also don't want a lot of ads on there. There are a couple things that the current outlets that are on InPress have to abide by for us to choose them, right? One of them is they can't have a super strict paywall. Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, they're not on InPress because they can't be. The other one is too many ads, right? If an outlet has chosen to basically, when you open it on your phone, it just feels like you're being yelled at. It's just like pop-ups, and it's we're not putting our users through that. They're not on InPress either. So they have to be net neutral, high reliability, can't feel like they're screaming with you with ads, and can't have a super strict paywall. Now, if you were a partner with InPress, the bigger ones of that come down, right? Because we know that you actually fall within the neutrality range. It's just the other things were disqualifiers. Take down the paywall, take down the ads, and we'll be okay. And then, of course, mutual usage of logos is necessary for marketing materials. So this is kind of what our go-to-market strategy looks like right now. Oh, it could be good if I change the slide, huh? So this is what it looks like right now. Obviously, we started in DC. If anyone asked why we started in DC, ask yourself, where would you launch a news-based dating app in America? Exactly. We are obviously currently in this area right now. We are in the midst of our friends and family round raise, and we are looking to do a seed round in the not so distant future. With the seed round money, we'll be expanding to New York City because, as a lot of you know, the New York to DC pipeline is very real. I actually happen to live in New York. My co-founder happens to live in DC, and pretty much everyone who works for us lives at one of the two. Then we get to the rest of the Northeast corridor because, fun fact, the Northeast corridor, if it was its own country, would be the third biggest economy in the world. So if we can get it there, we can get it to the rest of the country. And this is a little bit of the competitive advantages for those of you who are curious from the entrepreneurial side, right? It's first to market. Like I said, this is patented technology. This sort of tech hasn't existed yet. And the other one is that I think an interesting thing that I don't talk about enough is that it has the capability to not just create new connections, which is what dating apps and connection apps have historically done. It finds new people to get in front of you for you to make a choice on, but it can improve your existing relationships. That's where it gets interesting. When I said that you can actually tap your phones and scan each other's QR codes to see what your subconscious interests are right now, you can actually send that person a friend request. This is where it becomes a social media, right? Like, hey, I actually would love to match with you as a friend on InPress, because now when we actually have our chats on there, we'll get to see that those updating numbers every day. Maybe I want to gamify it. Maybe I want to say, hey, I'll bet, haha, friend, you have a worse math percentage with me today than my other friend. And maybe tomorrow that's not true. And in fact, we're actually looking at incorporating groups. The interesting about this is it's not a Facebook group. It's that you could opt in to being added to groups that we know you are the statistically most interested in something in a local area. Maybe it's I don't know, intramural soccer. You want to know, hey, you're in the top 100 people who love intramural soccer in like a 2-mile radius. Do you want to be added to this group and you can try to figure out how to play games? Yes. Maybe it's the New York Knicks. Hey, Knicks, we have the 1,000 most into Knicks fans in 2 miles. Do you want to maybe reserve a super fan section for them? Because you know they're going to love it, right? That kind of thing. Overall, though, our mission is just important to kind of drive home here, which is to establish an information ecosystem where love and intellect fuel each other's growth. I think it's important to realize that, as I've described here, these things are codependent in this model. We have to be honest, we have to be facts-driven, and we cannot lose sight of when there are going to be other outside influences saying, hey, why don't you just make the back end more efficient by letting people pick exactly what they're into? No. Why don't you do this, that, or the other for the money? No, this was based on journalism. It's how we got here. And we've actually built it to where if we ever change those ethics, we're kind of shooting ourselves. So I'll leave you guys with this quote by Kevin Systrom. How many of you have heard of Artifact News? No? You're aware that it's shut down, right? Yeah. This is not a famous quote of his. I was just reading an article about their shutdown, and this was something that he had said, and I just found it to be, well, maybe one of the most relevant quotes we're all going to read today. I'll give you a moment to take that in. But the point really being that we won't get to the next stage in journalism by simply doing more of the same, right? We need to appeal to emotion, not just in our writing, but in the ways that journalism touches people's lives. With that, like I said, you can all get on there and give it a go right now. There's a QR code. The only thing I have to request is that you please use real photos, because I won't say anyone, but someone tried to create an account yesterday, didn't use real photos, and my tech team was like, is this a spam account? And they tried to delete it. So please use real photos, treat it like it. I mean, it is an active app. People are actually going to see you. If you're in a relationship, use the friends version, or don't use it all if you don't want to. But and I will also preface that it's probably going to access is going to shut off in Syracuse at the end of the weekend, because unfortunately we can't have all of DC and then just like Syracuse and have people matching 500 miles away. So that's kind of, with dating apps, they're very geographically locked. So with that, thank you so much. I really do look forward to continuing to work with other fellow journalists. We really appreciate the support that we've got from you guys and being invited to share this really crazy way to bring people together through news. And we will now take questions if there are any. Thank you.
I just want to know how you decided on the name.
This will crack this room up. Actually, it was so originally the name was Scoop, right? That's what I wanted to call it at first. In hindsight, it's a terrible name, but you get the idea of why I wanted to call it Scoop, right? You kind of get the scoop on someone, journalism tie. It turns out that is not a great name for trademarking, and Scoop had already been used in. So I mean, I'll be honest with you. One of the hardest parts of the entire journey has been coming up with a name. That will always be the hardest thing, right? Because so many things are trademarked and used. And InPress just came up because trial and error, I guess. It sounded. I think more than that though. It spoke to the vibe that I was referring to earlier. It's a little tongue in cheek. It's kind of clever. It plays to both. It's really weird to find two things, like a word that's related to journalism and dating, right? Like there's not a lot of things that can work, not alone things that sound good as a name. So that's how we got there. But yeah.
Great presentation. We talked in the hallway earlier, and again, you further addressed, I think, the skepticism that I had on certain things. But I have another, and it's not skepticism; it's more naivete. Because I never did app dating. I sort of missed out on that. I've been married too long, all that. And so I almost want to ask, it's to you, but also to maybe other people who have experienced that. Like, what is the average engagement that someone has with a dating app? How finicky, for lack of a better term, are people with dating apps? Is it, I have no idea what that looks like. And I guess I'm curious to those who might use it. I know there's younger people in the crowd here, people who might be single. I don't want to single anybody out, but I'd be curious to hear, like, what are people's reaction to the idea? Because to the idea of a journalism, or let's call it news. I forgot the way you put it. It's not a news-based dating app. Yeah, I'd be curious, one, if you know the numbers around how many dating apps are on, and like what the engagement like turnover is on that, and then for others, how often they might engage with different dating apps.
Yeah. Well, that's like about 30 questions in one, so I'll try to get to some of the higher levels. But what I will say is this is going to be a weird way to approach that answer, but I guess entrepreneurship, think of it from the VC perspective, is dating apps are not something that they're not they don't have longevity, right? If they work, people leave them immediately, right? I mean, because they're finding relationships. That's why Hinge has the slogan of the app. What is it? The app that's meant to be deleted. The dating app's meant to be deleted, which is fine because it comes from a genuine place, and I guess it makes them look more efficient, and that's great. But that's actually not genuinely how their backend algorithm works. That said, the reason this is kind of just my answer to this, my perspective, is that if you have a Hinge, a Bumble, a Tinder, for anyone who's ever used a dating app before, let's just call it what it is. All the big players are different sides of the exact same coin, right? Bumble used to be that a girl would speak first. Hinge has prompts. But at the end of the day, that's all just topical differentiators for the end product, which is endless localized profiles that you swipe on based on user-generated information until forever. And that has created a lot of burnout, right? That's why people have deleted them, is because it's just superficial and kind of transactional, right? That's kind of what we're trying to get. Because we think about, again, tying it back to journalism, that sort of AI generated content, that misinformation, that random nonsense that's being shared by people on Facebook is also kind of just topical noise, and it doesn't have depth. And so I think that's kind of where the corollary is here. That's why we're trying to do something that you can't rush, you can't gamify, and is a little bit more telling. The other thing I would say that's a little bit more interesting here is that what the reason that dating apps have worked historically is because they're easy and they're binary, right? When you go on a dating app, you set up your profile, and the first thing you see is a face, and it's just yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. The reason that people might be I've heard people might be like, oh, well, I'm used to dating apps being that quick, but that's also the inherent problem with them, why they don't scale. We kind of force them to slow down in this way because the first thing people see on InPress, they see a newsfeed. And then only when they play ball, like we don't let them just see a newsfeed and then see leads. We have to see a newsfeed and tell them, hey, you need to read and rate at least 3 to 5 articles before you even see a single lead. And in fact, we're actually implementing a step system to that, where read 3 articles, rate 3 articles, see 5 leads. Read and rate 10 articles, see 10 leads. It gets up to 20 a day with the free account to kind of make sure that, hey, you're actually slowing down and doing this right. You're being honest with yourself. And frankly, we're getting the data that we need to actually give you a good experience. While that might not be the stickiest approach in the world, and there are a myriad of other ways we're going to be making it stickier that doesn't sacrifice the journalism, you could read our reviews on the App Store that people are into it. I mean, you also see some things that are like, oh, it's a really good startup. It's a little finicky because they just launched, which is true also, by the way. But the idea that people are actually enjoying that concept. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah.
Thank you, Adam. The media ethicist in me is mixed feeling, because if I go describe this at the Macula Ethics Center at Santa Clara University, the user privacy people, the internet ethics people, they're going to be like, oh my God, there's so much personal data here. I know you've built in your safeguard, so that's all good. So I've got 25,367 questions about all the interesting stuff.
Great, we'll do it all in 10 minutes.
But I'm going to stick to one of them. One of the uses of journalism is to inform people. That's the original theory of just democracy. The second use is we foster communities around democracy. And that is one-to-many relationships, that's many-to-many relationships in society, especially out of local journalism. So take off your entrepreneur hat, the VC hat for the moment, put on the philosopher's hat, because you do have a philosophy in this. I've seen you put that out. What do you see as an opportunity for going beyond the dating relationships and the best friend finding relationships into community relationships through interest? Because this is also shared interests. These interests can be in groups. I know you've got the commercial side of incentivizing organized groups like fans, clubs, and so on. But let's say 10 people using the app in DC wanted to form like an interest, maybe a nonprofit interest, maybe a volunteer interest to save like a local lake. I see these things happen. Do you see that as a possible use of the journalism that comes from this kind of individual?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. Yes. To be honest with you, when you said groups right there, that kind of is what we're envisioning with this. When we're building out the functionality, we're facilitating, what we're really doing is we're kind of giving invitations, which is like, you can't necessarily, the reason that it'll be, maybe it'll feel, how do I say this? Hopefully it'll strike some pride in the user that like, maybe it is local volunteering, maybe it's, cleanup of parks, that we're showing you that you care about this statistically more than pretty much anyone else around you. Would you like to turn this to an action and be surrounded by other people who also want to turn that into an action? What we're really doing, like I said, is kind of opening almost, for lack of a better term, it's almost like a WhatsApp group, right? But within the app, people obviously have to opt into this. We're not just going to do it for them. That would also feel very spammy. But what they do with that, to your point, I think it's seemingly endless. I think what we're going to have to be very mindful of is making sure that when those groups are created, they're only built on like tangible, like we said, like positive things. We still have to have a very heavy hand on this because, like I said, the AI will scan everything. And if things fall through the cracks, it could get dangerous. So the short answer is yes, I do see that. In what exact form it takes on the technical front, I don't know, but I think kind of we don't want to be too big brothery. That's the one thing I haven't really mentioned in this is if you were to go into settings, if you download the app and you go into settings, you'll see something called the match similarity range. That's because to your point, matchmaking, as I said, is very personal. We don't want to tell everyone that this is the perfect person for you all the time because we said so. Maybe you aren't looking for someone like you. Like, I'm crazy. My partner is nothing like me. Thank goodness, right? Much more methodical than I am. Maybe I want someone to match with someone who opposites attract. That match percentage score that we were talking about, you can go into your settings, put 0 to 10. Maybe you want someone a little more like you, 75 to 100. Or if you don't care, you could do 0 to 100 and let it ride, because we want to like give the tools to feel educated and holistically represented without strong-handing how people apply it. So I think what I'm getting at is we'll put them in the room together, so to speak, in a group. What they do with that is up to them. But maybe there are other technical downstream ways that we can almost start to create events. I think that's where kind of like a local partnerships thing comes in as well. We could partner with local parks. We could partner with movie theaters, whatever it is, and say, hey, we have a partnership with this movie theater, or we have a partnership with these, the DC Park Service. Would you guys like to volunteer? And then it just makes the DC Park Service easier to find volunteers because they know these people are into it. Again, I hope that answered your question. But
think it's on, yes. I'm curious how you think about the curation of what's in the app. I mean, I think a lot about how, I just remember some of the discrepancies between you ask people what kind of things are you interested in reading about or listening to about. And I know this, from the public media audience, it's always like, I want international news and I want, deep thought philosophy. But then you look at what stories they actually choose and it's like Beyonce and reality television. Given that you really have this mission behind what you're doing, I'm curious, like, do you have an editorial philosophy about what you put out there? And how influenced is it by what your users are actually reading and,
Yeah.
hitting the emojis that indicate a positive affect?
No. The answer is not really no, not at this stage, not at all, because to do that would, I think the word that's coming to mind is the periphery that we were talking about earlier. Because then what are we going to do? We're just going to get the big rocks all the time. We're not going to find the weird, cool nuance that, like, sure, maybe most readers in DC are interested in the politics section, but for the ones who are interested in the life sciences and like the different types of physics in the science section, that's where it gets juicy. That's really what the differentiator drives. That's where it becomes more human. So the answer is no. And we're not going to put more or less in any one section. We're just going to let people pick your own path. Like there's an R.L. Stein books, right? pick your own story. But what I will say, and because the whole mission thing for me is that I genuinely find recommender systems to be a pretty, I get why they're good, because I get why they're good for the user, because they're really what you want to see all the time, right? But the downstream effects of that are pretty awful. And that recommender system, the Apple Newses, the Google Newses of the world are kind of why we're in this problem anyways, right? So that's why we don't abide by that. I don't care that a user is like, I want to see, I genuinely had users be like, well, what if I want to see more misinformation? I'm like, well, then go find something else. If we can't sacrifice this, but we will. But one thing that's kind of interesting, and I didn't put this in the slide, and I didn't even think I'd actually get a chance to talk about it today, is we're going to put one section that's for you. Every section, by the way, has 4 articles. So in the grand scheme of things, there's like 80 to, if we add more, maybe 100 articles in a day. 4 of them might be for you, but they'll still be from the same ethical outlets, sourced from the same spot. Fine, that's a little bit of a concession to give people like that much of it without actually throwing off the algorithm or making it gamified. But the more interesting InPress specific curation sections that we're adding is match moods. So what are the people who you've connected with really interested in right now? What are they talking about? Local buzz. What is the local community on about, right? Like maybe you missed something in the local news section, but like what's the thing that everyone else is talking about around you? Just to kind of like, because not only is it interesting, but it also is more efficient for matchmaking, because it'll really change the numbers and your mutual interest with the existing matches if you're actually intentionally going after the things that that they're thinking about, right? So there's some fun gamification in there, but no, it doesn't ever change the ethics part of it. And like I said earlier, it can't.
Thanks. I have 2 pretty simple questions, I think. And I just registered as a friend, looking for friends. Just want to be clear. And I noticed the first article I went into was from a not to be named most obnoxious example normally of ad infused articles.
Oh God, really?
But no, in your app, it was like pretty nice. So are you maybe with permission or not, like blocking some ads? Are they giving you a different feed for that?
No, we can't do that right now. I mean, we just can't.
Interesting.
I'll tell you that maybe we just got lucky on that one. I mean, we are genuinely,
because I'll actually read that news source more through this site in order to avoid their most obnoxious ads. They're like the biggest offender. Seriously.
Mobile and web. Honestly, like maybe their mobile version just has
No
ads. No.
I think they're giving you a nice feed. Yeah. Second, I'm wondering, so beyond just the rating, are you factoring in things like bounce rate and anything about behavior as someone goes through the article and sentiment analysis around stuff like that?
So we're building that out right now. The answer is we're building it out in a way which we can communicate to the user that actually incentivizes more engagement with the actual journalism. So the idea that like, sure, maybe you clicked on something, but I accidentally click on things all the time. I don't mean to, so I don't know if that's a good indicator, but anyways, you clicked on something, but maybe you only got 1 paragraph in and then you rated it. well, that's not worth that much. We'll scour how far you made it in, how much time did you spend on, how far did you make it in, and weight those keywords and topics more because there's a higher likelihood that you actually engaged with it, right? Another thing that we're kind of doing is to kind of stickiness is a thing. If it's too boring, people aren't going to use it. And we're a network-based app. So if we don't have users who are retaining their attention, then the whole thing goes down. So like a quick rate system. So we'll tell people like, hey, maybe you see a newsfeed on an article on the newsfeed that you're objectively not into. It's not a thing you care about, right? Like whatever it may be. We'll allow you to kind of be like, not for me. We'll remove it from the newsfeed for you, but that doesn't mean you're not going to see less of it the next day. We're not catering it to you. It's just like, you can be like, nah. And we look, even though it's not that much data, because it's not, that's a binary indicator. It doesn't really affect the back end that much, but it's at least a concession to the user. Like, you know what, you got to do the thing. Like it's a way, it's something. You didn't have to then click through an article you never wanted to rate and give 5 different sentiment analysis on something you weren't interested in. So we're doing this in different ways that are kind of trying to keep it fun without like weighting the data in a way that is not representative and dishonest, yeah.
I was basically going to ask the same thing about engagement. So that's great because I think that piece of saying what you care about and then what you actually care about can be very different. But my smaller question was, I was noticing like you can go to, if you're on The Verge reading an article, you can then click through their links into other articles. Is that when you're answering, is this important to me? Is that taking into account those other articles or just the
no, that's a phenomenal question. That is because some outlets do that differently, right? Like sometimes they'll just show you a page that is the feed, and sometimes if you keep scrolling, it'll almost be just like more stories that are in there. No, basically our tech team has built it so that it only does the headline story more or less, and that's actually not that hard with AI. But yeah, that's a good question. Actually, you brought up something funny though, which is the gamify thing. It reminded me of that story we talked about earlier with the finance example. I think this is just a funny thing to indicate to the room is that because there's so much data that's layered on top of each other, the ambiguity is the point. It's like chaos theory is what keeps it honest. And so I'll use this example of I've had this conversation so many times. People have asked me, but I think of this one girl in particular who was like, what if I want to date with a finance guy? What if I want to find a finance guy, right? Maybe I'll find economic articles and rate them in a way that I think a finance guy would rate them. And it's like, we'll tell my co-founder and I'll be like, good luck. Because what are you really doing? Think about that, right? If there's 1,000 insights per article, potentially more or less, you might be saying that you're interested in economics, but what city was it in? Who were the players? What industries was it touching? There's actually other, 997 things that you just gave sentiment analysis on in multiple layers of ways that affect countless different parts of that chaos theory backend. So you're actually just ruining your own data, right? So it's kind of like the whole idea, everything that we're trying to describe here, that's the weightiness of how far you make it into the article, or it's basically disincentivizing not being authentic. And I think that's what we're finding so far is that users are enjoying at least the narrative of being told they're going to get slapped on the hand for trying to be dishonest, because then I think they're like kind of feeling safer in a way. But that wasn't even your question. I just want to make that point, but sorry.
Okay. I really like this approach to innovation where you've taken this idea from outside and brought it into this context. I think that's a great way to find ideas and to do something. But with this idea and the focus, as you shared, at least in this context, on media literacy, I just want to say, coming from the middle of the US, you're testing in DC, I get it. And I get it that there's probably a balance. There's a balance between traction and, finding an audience to get momentum and inertia. But I'm really curious and wonder how this app, given how it works, given the role of news, how it would work in different parts of the country where attitudes towards media probably differ than the coast, than DC, et cetera. So
yeah, the only answer I can give to that is we have to be outcomes driven. The outcomes are what's going to do it. We're not going to tell people who have been inundated with misinformation about the last 10 years that the media is evil and facts are relative. We're not going to just suddenly change their mind. But that's how we get them. It's a hook, line, sinker. It's that you know what, they might not believe in objective fact, but they still want a friend. And that applies to every human. So if we can draw those sort of holistic, we can just draw those outcomes or the stories. I think it's literally going to be like customer stories and word of mouth, of, like I said, the friends who are in New York or even Chicago who found their love or a great community. That's what's gonna, just like I use the example earlier, just like Uber. Like Uber is such a, like, ugh, what the hell is that? It's like, it's just very disruptive. Why would I ever do that? Why would I get in someone's car, right? It's only after you know that everyone else is doing it and that it's working that you're like, okay, whatever, I guess I'll give it a go. I think that will take time and it will take a lot of success and it will take repetition, but that's how you influence change.
On on the ad font is media reference. So they are one example of a media bias rating system service. There are others in the space. You're also saying you're trying to center locally because you're DC and then you launch in New York. So how are you finding, do they have enough local news sources in their pool? Because I've seen their numbers, they're like 265 sources they've actually rated.
Oh, no, they have like
or
tens
more.
of thousands.
So you have enough local sources for DC from their list.
Yeah,
And
to my own surprise, the answer to that is yes. Like they'll have newsletters from DC on there. And also in defense of them too, like if you don't have something or interested in it, you can request it, and it'll take like a week or two for the research team to get into it. But like you can actually just request it. They don't have everything, but even our third-party aggregator doesn't have everything. But I'd say they get about 80% of it. And the ones that aren't there is an avenue for requesting more. Like they'll even have the Georgetown Voice, the local student newspaper. I was like, that's cool. Or the Diamondback, the University of Maryland newspaper. Like that's just, I don't know. That's cool because I like to be able to tell like the local journalism students, like, expand to Syracuse, like this student newspaper could be on there. And it's the ability to come back to these students and say, hey, that thing you wrote about infrastructure, it's actually created X amount of relationships or something. It's just like a fun kind of data point, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you. Thank you.